Sophia woke up to the sound of rain tapping against the window. The sound of the droplets on the glass seemed like a constant whisper, something soft and insistent. She didn't know exactly what had woken her before, but the discomfort in her chest was real. She looked to the side, where her mother was still deeply asleep, curled up under the blanket. Next to the bed, the figure of Marcos, her stepfather, was absent, as usual on Sunday mornings when he left early for work. The house seemed quiet, but Sophia knew that, inside, nothing was at peace. Each day, what once seemed like a normal life of laughter and play was turning into something increasingly oppressive. In recent months, Marcos had become an uncomfortable presence. At first, he had a gentle way with her, bringing her sweets and toys, but something had changed. Sophia felt his gaze was different now, as if she were something to be watched, no longer a child, but a figure of interest he tried to understand in the wrong ways. She didn't understand why this was happening. What was once a distant figure now seemed like a shadow hanging over her. Fear, that strange feeling Sophia had never been able to name, began to make itself known. She spent her days with a constant sense of tension, as though she were waiting for something bad to happen, but not knowing what. At school, Sophia was a cheerful child. She had friends and liked to run in the yard during recess, but something inside her had changed. She began to withdraw, to speak less, to laugh less often. The jokes from her friends, which once made her heart beat faster with happiness, now passed by without the same lightness. Deep down, she knew something was wrong, but no one seemed to notice. Not even her mother. Carla, Sophia's mother, had always been a kind woman, but she was tired. She worked hard to support the household and seemed to be becoming more distant, as though living in another world. Her relationship with Marcos, which had begun full of passion, was now marked by silences and empty glances. Sophia felt her mother drifting away, as if she were in a bubble, unaware of the subtle changes in Marcos's behavior, or perhaps unwilling to see them. Sophia's pain was silent, hidden in the shadows of the house's hallways, in the moments when her mother was distracted with daily tasks. On that rainy morning, as she watched the soft light enter through the window, Sophia thought that maybe it would be better to forget everything. Maybe it would be better to leave the pain behind, pretend nothing had happened. But she couldn't. The fear was always there, like a constant presence. The clock in the living room struck 8:30, and Sophia quietly got up, trying not to wake her mother. She walked to the kitchen, where the smell of coffee filled the air. Marcos had left earlier, as usual, but there was something wrong in the way he had looked at her the night before. Something in his gaze, something in the words spoken in a low tone, had sent a cold shiver down her spine. She wished she hadn't noticed. She wished she could have ignored the strange touch on her shoulder and the muffled words he said, but she couldn't. The silence forming between her and her mother was starting to become a barrier that was hard to break. Carla never asked how Sophia was. Never asked what happened at school or how she felt. Maybe Sophia thought her mother already knew. Maybe her mother knew, but didn't want to see it. Maybe she was afraid of discovering the truth, just as Sophia was afraid to tell it. The day went on like the others. A simple breakfast, school, classes, the wait for the moment when the house would be quiet again. But something inside Sophia began to change. Something inside her started to rebel against the fear that imprisoned her. She didn't know what to do or how to act, but a part of her knew she couldn't continue like this. The emptiness was becoming unbearable. That afternoon, when she returned from school, the house was empty. Marcos hadn't come back yet, and her mother was in the living room, with tired eyes and a distant expression. Sophia sat on the couch, watching the scene that repeated itself every day. They were there, but at the same time, they were so far away. She wondered, why does no one notice what's happening to me? And for the first time, a small voice in her mind answered, maybe you have to say it. But she still didn't know how. The house always seemed so silent. The sound of the rain was now replaced by the empty echoes of the walls, and time seemed to pass more slowly when Sophia was alone. She tried to convince herself that maybe she was exaggerating. maybe it wasn't a big deal. After all, Marcos wasn't totally bad. He still said he liked her, that she was important to him, but there was something in the way he looked at her that made Sophia want to shrink away. Something she couldn't explain, but that was always there, like a shadow. And that shadow grew, day by day, until it became impossible to ignore. At school, she started to skip more often. The excuses were always the same. I have a headache, or I'm tired. But in truth, Sophia didn't want to be there anymore. The questions from her classmates, the games at recess, everything felt like a burden she couldn't carry. They didn't know what she was going through, and that made her feel even more alone. She felt a weight in her chest, as if she were carrying something so heavy that no one else would be able to understand. Her mother, Carla, seemed more distant every day. Sophia wanted to tell the truth. She wanted her mother to see her, but something stopped her. It was fear. The fear of not being believed, the fear of hearing that she was making everything up, the fear of being ignored. Carla, who used to spend hours playing with her and asking about her day, now seemed so distant, so consumed by her own problems, that Sophia felt she couldn't count on her. Her mother was weak, desperate for a life that was no longer the same, trapped in a relationship that was draining her more and more. And Sophia knew that. The most painful moment for Sophia was when Marcos came home after work. It was when the fear became more real. She knew he would watch her, that he would try to get closer in some way, and that made her feel as if she were invisible to his eyes, but at the same time, too visible to her own. Marcos's gestures had become subtler, but just as invasive. A touch on her arm, a lower word in her ear, a look that made her feel dirty, as if she were being marked by him in a way that no one else would understand. That day, when she got home from school, Sophia felt the weight of shame even more strongly. Marcos was in the living room, watching TV, as usual. The tension in the air was palpable, and she just wanted to escape. When he looked at her, a crooked smile formed on his face, and that made Sophia feel even smaller. She tried to ignore him, but Marcos stood up and walked over to her. With a slow gesture, he placed his hand on her shoulder again, as if it were something normal. But for Sophia, that touch wasn't normal. The simple act of touching her made her feel a shiver down her spine, a growing sense of desperation. But she didn't say anything. She stayed silent, as she always did, because she knew she didn't have the strength to react. "How was school today, my little one?" Marcos asked, his voice soft, but with a tone that made her feel there was something hidden behind it. Sophia bit her lip and answered softly. "It was normal. I'm just tired." The answer seemed to satisfy him.
He didn't insist.
She fled to her room, trying to shake off the feeling of panic forming inside her. When the door to her room closed, she sank into the bed and lay there, still. The silence seemed to be the only thing that understood her, and loneliness, the only company she could bear. In the following days, Sophia began to notice how much the distance between her and her mother was widening. Carla didn't seem to notice that something was wrong. When she asked, with a tired smile, how her daughter was, Sophia always said the same thing. "I'm fine, Mom."
And it was true.
She was fine in parts, but not deep down. The weight of what she carried was becoming unbearable. She felt as if she were sinking into a sea of lies, and with each passing day, it became harder to breathe. At school, the days began to drag on. She could no longer hide the sadness on her face, but no one seemed to notice. Her friends commented on how quiet she was, but none of them knew what was really happening. They didn't see the pain that Sophia kept inside. They didn't know the secret she carried like an impossible weight to bear alone. Then on a rainy day, something began to change. Sophia felt an emptiness so great inside her, a pain so deep, that the words of a classmate, who she barely knew, reached her heart. "If you ever need to talk, I'm here," she had said, unknowingly leaving a deep impact with those words. Sophia found herself thinking about those words for hours. If someone was willing to listen, maybe she wouldn't have to carry that weight alone. But shame still prevented her from taking the first step. That night, she lay in bed, her eyes fixed on the ceiling, trying to think of a way to escape the nightmare she was living. Her mind was filled with doubts and fears, but one thing became clear: she couldn't continue in silence. Even though she didn't know how, Sophia knew she had to tell the truth. Maybe, just maybe, the weight of silence was heavier than she could bear. The rain was falling harder that afternoon, and the sound of the drops hitting the windows seemed more like a lament, as if the world outside knew the pain Sophia carried. The house was silent, except for the hum of the TV in the living room, where her mother was sitting, absorbed in some program she wasn't really paying attention to. Marco still hadn't come home from work, but the tension was already in the air. Sophia could feel it. The fear she had of facing the next day, of being forced to live through another night of silence and loneliness, was growing with each passing hour. She sat in the wooden chair in the kitchen, her hands on her knees, as if she could find some strength in her own body to get out of this situation. But everything seemed impossible. Every attempt to talk to her mother failed. Every attempt to ask for help felt more distant. It was then that the phone rang, breaking the silence of the house. Carla lazily got up to answer, and Sophia, not knowing why, felt a pressure in her chest, as if this were an opportunity. However, when her mother began talking to a friend on the phone, Sophia felt even more invisible. Her mother was so immersed in her own life that Sophia seemed to disappear into the background of that house. The pain was suffocating, but she knew she couldn't live with it alone anymore. It was then that, on an impulse Sophia didn't completely understand, she stood up from the chair and went to the front door. The rain was falling even more intensely now, but what she felt inside was an urgent need to run away, even if just for a moment. She didn't know where she was going, but she knew she didn't want to stay there anymore, in that place where her fears seemed to multiply. She walked through the streets of the neighborhood, the cold rain bothering her, but in some way, making her feel more alive. Sophia didn't have a clear destination, but she knew she needed to get out of there. The streets were empty, the houses silent, and the world seemed to be drifting away from her. But then, she passed by Donna Lourdes' house. Donna Lourdes was a lady who lived at the end of the street. She had always been a welcoming figure for Sophia. When she was younger, Sophia liked going to her house to see the cats and listen to the stories Donna Lourdes would tell. The lady always smiled kindly and said that Sophia was a special girl, a girl with a big heart. She didn't know it, but those words had stayed in Sophia's memory, like a beacon in the dark. Sophia stopped in front of Donna Lourdes' house and hesitated. But, as if something inside her decided that it was time to be seen, she climbed the small steps of the porch and knocked on the door. Her heart was pounding, but the feeling that she was doing the right thing made her not back away. Donna Lourdes opened the door with a gentle smile, but when she saw the expression in Sophia's eyes, her smile disappeared. "Sophia, dear, what's going on?" Donna Lourdes asked, worry etched on her face. Sophia swallowed hard. Her words stuck in her throat. She wanted to say everything but couldn't. The shame was overwhelming, and the fear of being judged or not being believed paralyzed her. But looking into Donna Lourdes' eyes, something in her gaze made Sophia's voice finally break free. I need to talk about what's happening. I can't take it anymore. Donna Lourdes. Sophia's voice was weak, as if she didn't believe her own words. Tears started to fall down her face, and she couldn't hold them back. Donna Lourdes pulled her inside and hugged her tightly. Sophia didn't know what to do, but Donna Lourdes' embrace was like an unexpected relief. She had never known that someone could feel so much care for her, someone who would look at her and embrace her without judgment. Tears of relief began to flow, and she finally told everything. "Marcos, he does things to me, things that aren't right. I don't know what to do." The words came out in a rush, as if they had been trapped for so long that, when they finally escaped, they all came at once. The pain and fear intertwined in her voice. Donna Lourdes didn't say anything for a moment. She just held Sophia tighter and made her sit on a nearby sofa. After a few minutes, she spoke softly but firmly. "Sophia, you're not alone. You don't have to carry this alone anymore. I'm going to help you. I'm going to help you tell the right person. You have a voice, dear, and it will be heard." Donna Lourdes didn't just listen. She acted. She took Sophia to a support center for children who were victims of abuse, where she was welcomed by professionals who knew how to handle what was happening. They comforted her, helped her understand that what Marcos had done wasn't her fault, and that she was brave for asking for help. They helped Sophia realize that there was a path to recovery, and that she had the right to live without fear, without pain. It was at that center that Sophia had the chance to meet other children who had gone through similar experiences. There, she no longer felt isolated. She didn't feel like the only victim, but a survivor who had, by her side, other people willing to walk with her on the path to healing. Donna Lord, with her kindness and wisdom, was the first step for Sophia to begin understanding that her voice mattered, that she wasn't alone, and that help was there, waiting for her. And it was this act of courage, of simply asking for help, that began to break the cycle of pain and fear Sophia had been living in until then. The next step would be more difficult. Facing the police, her mother, the pain of judgment, and the possibility of being rejected by those she loved the most. But for the first time, Sophia felt she had a chance. She wasn't alone anymore, and that made all the difference. Sophia was sitting in the small room of the support center, looking out the window as the leaves danced in the wind. She had been through so much, and the road ahead would still not be easy. But now, for the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of relief in her chest. The weight of the secret, the fear, was starting to dissipate. She was no longer carrying it all alone. She knew that the legal process against Marcos wouldn't be simple. He was still free, but the police were investigating, and he would soon be called in to testify. The pain of remembering what had happened, the shame and fear, were still present. But Sophia had learned one important thing. She was not alone. Her mother, although it had taken her a while to realize, was now by her side, seeking justice. In the first days after the report, Carla seemed lost, unsure of how to cope with the pain of knowing what her partner had done to her daughter. The shock, the guilt, and the anger were written on her face. She wondered how she hadn't noticed before, but Sophia's words, the eyes full of pain, were finally opening her eyes. She was determined to change, to no longer be the mother who ignored her daughter's pain. Carla sought support in groups for mothers and went to therapy to learn how to help Sophia heal her wounds. Over time, Sophia's healing process began to take shape. She was supported by therapists who helped her understand that the abuse didn't define her. She was not the victim that everyone thought she should be. She was strong. She was a survivor. What had happened to her was a painful part of her story, but it was not her entire story. Sophia found strength in unexpected places. In the words of her friends, who, upon realizing what was happening, were there to offer support. In the love her mother, though late, began to show in a true way. And most importantly, in the support from the people who welcomed her and helped her rediscover her voice. The crucial moment came in court. Marcos, the man she thought she would never have the courage to face, was there, standing before her. When it was her turn to speak, the world seemed to stop. Sophia knew her voice was trembling, but she was there. She was no longer the silent, scared child. She had become a woman with a story to tell, a woman who now used her pain as strength. When she looked at the judge and the jury, the words came out of her mouth with a clarity she had never imagined. I am no longer your victim. I am the owner of my own story. And this story will no longer be written by you. The verdict came shortly after Sophia's statement. Marcos was convicted, and his sentence reflected the gravity of his crimes. But the real trial Sophia faced was internal. It was about leaving behind the child who was afraid and embracing the woman she had become. She was no longer defined by the abuse. She was defined by the courage to speak, by the strength to rise, by the will to change the future for the children who would come after her. Now, with the trial behind her, Sophia became an advocate for abuse victims. She started participating in awareness and support programs, visiting schools, talking to other children, and encouraging them to speak out. Her experience, so painful, was now her strength. She used her voice to protect other children, to ensure they never felt like she did. Invisible. And so, Sophia's story, which began in pain and silence, ended in the light of hope, recovery, and empowerment. She found the courage to rewrite her destiny and make sure her voice was heard, never silenced again. Message to parents asterisk. 1. Be aware of the signs asterisk. It's essential that parents are always alert to changes in their children's behavior. Children may not know how to express what they are going through, so behaviors such as isolation, unexplained fear, or changes in attitude may be signs that something is wrong. 2. Never ignore the small clues asterisk. Shame and fear can prevent a child from speaking out. If a child shows discomfort with another person, never ignore it. Asking, listening, and validating your child's feelings is crucial. 3. Create a safe environment asterisk. Parents need to ensure that their children know they can trust them, no matter the situation. If the child knows they will be heard and not judged, they will feel safer in sharing their fears. 4. Reinforce the value of self-esteem asterisk. Teaching children early that their body belongs to them and that they have the right to say no is fundamental. Promoting self-esteem and ensuring that children understand the value of their feelings and boundaries can make a significant difference in abuse situations. 5. Seek help when needed asterisk. If you notice something is wrong, seek help immediately. There are many resources and professionals who can guide both parents and children in dealing with these difficult situations. 6. Emotional support is key asterisk. The healing journey is not easy, and children may need constant emotional support. Don't hesitate to seek therapy and other support services to ensure that the child recovers in a healthy way. 7. Never underestimate the power of a simple, "How are you?" asterisk. Sometimes, the difference in a child's life can come from a simple but meaningful conversation. Ask, listen, and show that you're there to support them, no matter what happens. Sophia's story is a reminder that, with courage, support, and love, children can overcome the worst adversities. As parents, you have the power to make a difference. If a child's pain is heard and embraced, hope can ignite.